Thanks.
All right, so here we are again, and as we always are. And Anthony, I've been talking a little bit about the idea of finally getting to the place we thought we wanted to be and realizing that it doesn't seem to be the place we want to be.
Yeah.
My comment on that is that if we're thinking is our only source and thinking is in fact reality and truth, we think that the expectations we have are going to be what we think and only what we think. So when we get to those places and they're not that way, we think our expectations are dashed when the expectations were dashed when we originally made believe they were only going to be what we thought things would be because we thought thoughts were true. We thought what we initially thought would happen was the only thing that could happen. And that basic concept puts us at odds with everything and everyone because everyone is involved in everything.
Yeah, so it's never going to go the way you thought it was going to go.
Well, until you start thinking that it's going to go the way it goes.
Yeah, that's it.
It is going to be what it is. And the essence of that is coming to terms with the fact that that's how it is right now. As you begin to notice it's that way now, it begins to make less sense to think of it as some other way then, there, or then, them, with them, there, or then. You just begin to say, oh, if the present is that way now, and there are certainly things happening now I don't think I have anything to do with. So I make believe that by not believing I have anything to do with them, I have nothing to do with them, is a chance to say, wow, maybe I do have something to do with all of them. Maybe I have something to do with everything based simply on the fact that I exist. If I didn't exist, I would not have anything to do with anything. The fact that I exist may mean I have everything to do with everything. And it doesn't mean that I am alone in that. It means we all share that along with all other things, which in thinking about this accurately, you can pretty much see that nature has been operating on that basis to be giving us everything we need to continue in our existence and surviving, water and air and gravity and all the things that would be fundamental to our human experience. We've been witnessing those things as being fully available all the time and as they are all the time, rather than as we thought of them. They've been doing what they've been doing, regardless of what we thought of them the whole time. So for us to start thinking that what we're doing in our thinking is all that's actually happening is a major misstep in our ability to function, because it becomes primary to our ideas about reality and truth, which means everything we think about now is contaminated by that line of thinking. And it isn't really, it's only the thinking about the thinking that's contaminated, because we keep thinking more about the thinking that's going to solve it. Closer inspection's going to get it. Further and further, harder and harder, looking closer is going to get it right. That's the
or accomplishing what you've always wanted to do and just go, it really wasn't that big of a deal and it's really not that important. That feeling like, okay, that was everything you wanted and that's not enough now.
Well,
now you want
the enough is now. And to the degree we think it isn't now, we're going to create those ideas that it's somewhere else with more or less of something else and someone else.
Yeah.
Typically someone else, not always, but at least it's going to include a thought of ourself that isn't true. It's just imagined. Us being in this imaginary place, this fantasy future, rather than saying, wait a minute, I'm here now. And if everything is everything, it's also here right now, and I'm with everything, and I can't have more than all there is. And if I have all there is and I keep thinking I don't, that would be a pretty emblematic faulty thought process on the same basis of what we just talked about, which is thinking that how things are going isn't how they're going, because they should only be going the way I think they're going. So,
I got the last part.
Well,
or just the thing I'm upset about is this is the greatest it's ever been, and it's still just not enough. It's just a little bit of a letdown. I wanted more. It's just like, come on, you never get it. It's so sad.
But Anthony, the sad part is you keep thinking your thinking's going to conclude it, and better than to think that, and it hurts, and you grieve for the totality of your present awareness. You grieve.
Yes, I like what you're talking. Now I like the way you're talking. I was grieving for the totality of my awareness. Like that, I can relate to that. This is the sad part.
Well, But seeing it as sad is beginning to see that you wouldn't see it as sad if it was your highest point, if it was something that you were achieving.
Right.
But seeing it as sad is actually a fulfillment of reckoning with it and accounting for it,
Yeah.
and being honest about the experience you're having.
Sounds like you've had this feeling before, because you cannot describe it unless you've had it.
I have it every day to a degree. I mean, I'm moved by things I used to not think were movable. And
Yeah.
there's, I've realized that thinking is infinitely flexible. It's always able to do gymnastics around anything.
Or how about this, Jack? I've always wanted to be somebody else and always wanted to do so many things that I just lost track of who I really am. I mean, it's not.
No, you
it's
didn't
not even
lose track
possible.
of it. You're just so committed to the idea of the other self you thought you could become, or the parts of that self you like that you think you now have become, that you may
Yeah.
believe that you've lost track of something that can't be lost, so it can't even be found because it's never gone anywhere. It's always been your essence.
Yeah. Or wanting things
Now-
I already have. I guess part of it is wanting things I already have.
Exactly. Very good. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the point.
Literally, though.
I get it. I'm literally, that's what I've been repeating.
Yeah.
While you've been thinking.
It's also figuratively, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. That's how accounting works, figuratively. You add up the figures.
Yeah.
And if they add up, they make sense. If they don't add up, something's wrong in the math. Like the writing today, you can do accounting forward or backward, and you're going to find out that something's wrong. We can do accounting forward and backward. We can think we need to go back in history to figure it all out, and that doesn't ever seem to work. But if we go present, where it is, what's happening, the accountability is automatic because it's accounting for what's actually happening, which includes everything that's ever happened. Our experience presently is the sum total of everything that's ever happened and ever been thought, never been done by anyone or anything. Right now is that sum total. If it can't be here, where would it be?
Tomorrow.
or something else. But you start seeing that if the fundamental thought about reality as truth and truth as reality, because they're ultimately the same thing, they're just an essence of absolute knowing awareness that is conscious, and conscious, it's conscious, but it isn't faltering and it isn't changing like thoughts do, like our conversation does. Good morning, Lindsay.
Hey, Lindsay.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Jack.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm so happy to be here, to be part of this.
Thank you.
We're happy you're here. I'm happy you're here.
I think happiness is the nature of the totality of being where we are, and we're always there. We're always there. And so unhappiness, just like complicated obsessive thinking, is a condition created by thinking we're not where we are, or thinking we should be somewhere else, or thinking we should be someone else, or with someone else, or with something else. It's
as someone else.
All those ideas suggest that the totality of an absolute state of being isn't here now. It all starts this whole search and this journey and this trip and this travel and the path. And everybody talks about the path they're on and the journey and all. The fact is, if we're journeying from where we are, we're not conceding that the only place we can be is exactly where we are right now, precisely, perfectly, as we are right now. And as we are isn't limited to how we think. It's as we are as spiritual beings, as absolute states of awareness and knowing. Now, that can be a stretch to thought and seem preposterous to the thought that kept thinking it would turn more thought into reality and truth, and thinking that more and more thought about ourself would turn the self we thought about into reality and truth, when in fact, that's just another fantastic voyage of thought, imagining someday it would be real if we think harder about it and longer about it. And that's obsessive addictive thinking. Anthony, I lost your voice. I think you're on mute.
I went on to mute, but that's exactly right.
There are times I would prefer that.
Me too. Sometimes I say some of the stupidest stuff and I'm on mute. I'm like, thank God I was on mute right now.
Well, listen, the stupidity, it certainly isn't intelligent to make believe that what's happening isn't happening. And because we don't think it's happening, it's not happening. That isn't very intelligent. right? Because it doesn't reflect a knowing nature. A knowing nature is intelligent by nature because it isn't thinking, it just knows.
And for our home viewers, I'm about to have our first cup of coffee right now.
Uh-oh.
Did you have coffee, Jack? I don't see you drinking coffee ever.
I'm up at 5. I do it then.
Oh,
Or 6, it depends.
sorry for the interruption.
No, it's all right.
But it's going to get good.
If the totality of the present state of being awareness isn't enough, first of all, it can't be any more than it is, because if it's infinite, it's not a quantity. It's not a function of more or less. It's just a state of ever-present awareness.
Yeah.
If we think it isn't enough, and or we think all it is what we think of it, it's going to have us think we're not doing what we're doing to be suffering what we're suffering, because we're going to make believe now that it's life that's complicated and the universe that's complicated and people that are complicated, not the thinking we're doing. And that's what addiction does. Flips everything backward. Yeah. Now, it doesn't, everything backward in thinking has no impact on reality and truth, because reality and truth, being absolute, are not changing. They don't change because we think they change. Our thinking about them changes when we do those things, which is why we think they become responsible for our problems. We think reality and truth are no longer real and true, and that's what's wrong.
Well, or how about just for an interesting little look on ego? Because there's always something that bothered me. One is I forgot this really nice jacket that I wanted to wear with my suit, So I was like, why am I so upset that I don't have the jacket? And I'm like, well, because people won't think that I'm as cool. People would like me better if I had that jacket on. And so I was upset that more people weren't going to like me, that I'm never going to see again, just people walking by,
Isn't it interesting, though, how imagination, in your instance and description, has you only imagine that what's wrong was that everyone would think you were great in that jacket.
Yeah.
While the flip side of that is thinking that everything you do is never enough. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the scary part. That's the part I don't look at.
In one direction, well, you also don't look at the idea within those obsessive thoughts that somebody's going to say, that guy looks like an idiot in that coat.
That's not possible.
Exactly.
Who would be wearing their jacket? It's 100 degrees outside.
We rule out all possibility as the possibility of what we think is possible addictively. So to think that all is happening is wrong, and to think that all that is going to happen is right is wrong, to the degree that we make believe it's only going to be what we think and not realize that people are going to think exactly what they think, how they think, and what they think.
A day later, I'm still thinking about all the people that I never knew that would have thought something better.
Yeah, but you can see, Anthony, how the investment in that thinking continues to have us make believe that someday the investment's going to pay off. It's like gambling.
Yeah.
If everyone was able to double their bet, they would always be able to break even eventually.
Right.
But if you double a penny for a month, it adds up to about $11 million. So if you're doubling a dollar, it's going to add up. You got to have about $200 million standing by to be able to do that 30 times. And it's impossible to do this seemingly all the time, chronically, and end up making the difference up in the same chronic thinking, because the chronic thinking is constantly
and that's where my thinking went. So I was upset that not enough people that I'm never going to meet or whatever didn't think I was that cool. And I'm like, why don't I just try to make it so that I think that it's a cool jacket and just worry about me liking it? Why do I have to worry about everybody else liking my jacket?
But the reason why, if you want an answer, is because you make believe what you think is true and what you think isn't true. So everything you think is not going to be true. And as a result, you make believe how you appear needs to look the way you think you should by everyone else's opinion. Yeah. Because you're doubting your own ability to think straight. You're going to rely on them also thinking the one way about you that you think will straighten you out.
And that was a joke as we were kind of growing up as kids. And you'd ask people what they thought of your hair. Do you like your hair looks good? Does mine? Like you'd always need somebody else's opinion. How does my hair look? I never can
think about my own. The definition of self-consciousness. We talk about this self being ego, and really it's just thinking. When we use thinking to think of itself, we have somehow presumed that the self it thinks of is us. when in fact, when thinking thinks of itself, it's thinking about more thought. It's just constantly thinking more thought. That's obsessive thinking. To make believe it's who we are, again, is another lie. A lie is an attempt to reverse the order of truth, because truth as a principle would always be first. It can't be last. It can't be second. It can't be third. It's always first in terms of human affairs. Just like every principle, it's always principled. In the book, it talks about principles before personalities. Why is that? Because principles are the basis for personalities. What are the personalities? The personas that we assume and assimilate and decide. They're the roles we play, the choices we make about who we'd like to be, what we'd like to express, but we think of those things as becoming who we are rather than simply choices we're making to express a persona. Just like an actor chooses a role. They're roles that we play.
Yeah.
It's not who we are. Our essence doesn't change, and our essence isn't an action. Our essence isn't a choice. It's just an absolute state of being. So self-consciousness, not ironically, is defined as undue regard for appearance. Exactly what you were just talking about. How does everybody else see me?
Yeah.
Why would we worry so much about how we are seen by others if we had confidence in the thinking we were doing about who we were? We don't have that confidence, so we look elsewhere for satisfaction, and that's exactly what addiction is.
Yeah.
The idea that we can feel better by doing something else somewhere else, more or less of something else somewhere else, at some other time, in some other place, with someone else, and we'll be better. And consistently, when we get there, like a lot of guys who spend, sports guys very often, fighters are a great example. They work and work and work and work and work to be the champ. And when they become the champ, there's no more work to be done because there's nobody better than they are. They don't have anybody as a target. They have no goal. And all of a sudden they start getting lazy. They start getting sloppy. They start doing things that don't support that contention. They fall off the mountain because the next kid has them in mind and he's fighting to climb that mountain and get there. And it happens in business. It happens in arts. I remember Freddie Prinze when he killed himself. He was a kid who came from Puerto Rico and ended up on stage with the best comedians in this country. People had taken years to become famous. He got famous in 2 years. He was with them all. He went home one night and shot himself.
That's because his dad was big, though, right?
Well, that's his son you're thinking about. But he killed himself. Yeah. If we have ideas about ourselves that are small and tiny, and so tiny as to not exist because we're basing who we think we are on thoughts that have no basis, and then all of a sudden get great acclaim, how much farther out of place could we feel than to have everyone else? We finally get the attention everybody else gives us and don't think it's true and end up feeling worse as a result of the thing we've always wanted, which is admiration and attention. All those things you're describing, Anthony, and thinking that person out there, when they saw you in that coat, is going to give you the thing you claim not to have. If you actually got it all from them, you would realize that something's seriously wrong because the source of the problem has nothing to do with appearance. That's where we should start, because that's where I'm at. It has nothing to do with appearance and everything to do with substance. Yeah. And think of substance. Think of understanding and substance. Or it's kind of like a chameleon that finally realizes, hey, I don't have to change my color every time I'm on a different color. This whole time I've been wasting, always worried about being the right color. So no matter how many different ways you choose to tell this story, Anthony, the problem is the same. And we can discuss that problem. Yeah. We can continue to loop off into all those other versions. Well, it's about not having to make those changes, realizing at some point all that was just a waste of time. Just like that's the depressing part. How much time are you wasting right now thinking about that? Yeah. The point is, right now is actually the present. And I would suggest, and this may seem so far reaching, but the present isn't in time because it's always new. It's never old. It is not on a basis of a continuum that starts and stops. And within our universe, the speed of light, if anyone was to be able to achieve the speed of light, time would have no effect on that movement. So as we've talked about before, if that even exists within our universe, then we have perfect examples for this state of being that isn't born of matter, it isn't corporeal, it isn't temporal, it isn't something that is matter, it's literally something that doesn't matter. to the degree that our thinking thinks of things, and even no thing is referring to things, just the absence of things. It's still thinking of things in relation to no thing. This is a something that isn't even a thing. It's just an awareness, a substance, an absolute state of being that would be natural for all of us, including human nature. Not just something that is specific to the being nature, but actually included in the human nature, which if we are not describing or discussing or expressing our knowing nature honestly, we're going to act in ways that are contrary to nature. We're going to act unnaturally and unhealthy and abnormally. And to think of all those ways as normal and healthy and natural is to, again, just continue to lie about what we're doing and make believe that somehow, someday, the lie is going to come true if we just continue to manage it longer and maintain it longer and focus on it longer and think about it longer. The present state of that being is absolutely where we always are. It is the presence of existence, and everything and everyone that exists is present now. Each of us, all of us, everywhere. Not just the ones who agree with this, but those who don't. Their lack of agreement. If I decide not to agree with reality, reality doesn't suffer. My experience of reality suffers. My human experience, the weight of what I think matters turns into matter, and matter weighs something, starts to bear on me, on my experience, and my body, as a matter of fact. My body wears that weight, the anxiety and stress. Pressure is resistance, and it creates pressure. Pressure creates tension. Tension is stress. Stress is anxiety. Anxious disorders are the idea that something is out of order. If my thinking is thinking about personality first and all those imaginary ideas I have about persona, then I'm thinking backward, because substance would be the nature of nature. Not a persona, not something superficial. And yet the immediacy of an absolute state of being is superficial because it isn't out of reach. And yet its substance is superficial, and our substance is also invisible. And yet our visible form is made of that substance, and our visible form decays and disintegrates when we make believe that who we are is not who we are and undermine our ability to function properly by doing that. It's like an electrician hooking up all the wrong wires to the wrong things and wondering why the wiring keeps catching on fire, and the building if he isn't stopping the fire. And we do that. We manifest those implications are the consequences of the thinking we're doing. And they're weighty. They're impressions we make. So if the present state of being is present now, when we begin to literally just concede that it's that way regardless of how we think, the disjointed thinking becomes more obvious, and it also, being seen as unhealthy, isn't taken seriously, so there is no weight in it anymore, and it starts to dissipate.
Yeah.
The allowance of things being as they are doesn't have any resistance. There's no resistance. And you don't have to define them any further to say, well, they certainly are how they are. And whatever I'm doing is what I'm doing. And if I'm experiencing what I'm doing right now, I don't have to admit all the details about what I'm doing to experience just that, and to conclude just that and be accurate about it and create a relationship to what's happening that puts my brain at ease, puts my body at ease, because I'm actually addressing things accurately. The simplicity of it seems preposterous given the enormous complexity we've each gone to some degree, to try to figure it out and get to the bottom of it. And for us, getting to the bottom of it is a grave. It's a burial ground. And to feel buried alive while we're alive is certainly not the point of living. It's certainly a possibility of our experience, but it's not the point of living. It's not inspired. It's not enthusiastic. It's not vital. It's not healthy. It's not normal. It's not logical. It's not reasonable. It's not rational. It's insane.
Again, it's interesting how if one thing is going wrong, and everything else is going right, I just focus on the thing that's wrong. Like, how can I fix what's wrong, or what's wrong? Because it's helpful to do that, I guess, at some point. But if you do it overly, it's not helpful.
It's familiar to fret.
Yeah.
Well, why would it be wrong, Anthony?
Well, it's like the tooth. It's the tooth analogy too. That Jana and I hear your voice, where you touch. If your tooth is hurting, you keep touching your mouth to see where is it really hurting, and you tongue it a little bit.
What is wrong, though?
I sold something I didn't want to sell.
No. What's wrong at the fundamental level?
You.
What's wrong at the most fundamental level? Not
Nothing.
The story, not the 75,000 stories you've created about all the different things you've done based on that single thought. What's the thought?
Yeah. And something's not right.
Okay, but what would not be right?
Telling that something.
The illusion of the past.
What?
What's that, Jenna?
The illusion of the past.
Okay, but what is that? Thinking a thought is truth.
Yeah.
When you think of the past, when you
think
think of the past, when you think of the thing, when you think of the person, when you think of the time, you think of the this, the that, the do, boom.
It's not the truth.
That's obsessive thinking. Why? Because we can think everything we want, and we can think millions of things based on the same wrong thought and wonder why each one of those things keeps turning to shit. As though we don't know.
How about that question that kid kept asking me? You know what the truth is, right? Remember, that's what he was asking. You know what the truth is. So maybe he was onto something there.
How about right now?
The truth is that you need to know what the truth is.
You don't need to know it. You know it. You already know it. You wouldn't know something's wrong if you didn't know it. How would you know what's wrong if wrong was all there was? It would seem right, because wrong would be all there is.
Yeah, I don't
There would be no distinction.
Well, I do think the familiarity of the fret thing, like I don't somehow in my less of my mind being less of an unquiet mind, like it seems like all day long things are synchronizing, and I'm always like just little things like, I have 3.5 acres, so I'm always losing clippers, or I'll lay down my gloves somewhere. But it's a big deal when you're tromping, you're 65 years old and you're tromping up and down hell all day, and you're like, fuck, where are my clippers?
Yeah.
It's probably the healthiest thing you can do is losing those things. You're getting a lot of exercise.
Serious. I'm not lying, man.
I get it.
I am fit. I am fucking super fit. I can so kick ass. When guys come and help me to
Janet,
move,
there's a show on Netflix that a guy went to the places where people live to 100 and over consistently. Yeah. And one of the things that he discovered was that people who lived in locations where they had to climb, like in steep locations in Italy, where they're in those little towns in the mountains where they've got to climb back up to their house every day. Yeah. That was one of the reasons they stayed healthy, was the climb, the steepness.
Yeah.
So in a way, it serves your interest, but in the mental way, you're seeing that you're forgetting and you're wondering why, and it becomes this sort of punitive, abusive process in your brain, I'm sure, at times.
No, now it's all pure gratitude, like all day long, like literally, like I'm saying, it's all synchronous now. It's like no matter what it is, and there's like all kinds of stuff that happens to all of us all day long that we could be irritated about. And I'm not kidding. Everything, like I find the clippers, I can actually get the ball hitch on my trailer. Like things are just coming together, that my normal reaction from history, because I would always like sabotage things before they happen, like always think the worst, like that's not going to work or whatever. Everything, you just have to calm down, take a breath, hang out, and things start falling together.
Well, they don't start falling together, they're already together, and what's falling are the thoughts you have about them that aren't true.
Perception.
Yeah, exactly.
But all day long I'm like, God, thank you.
That's funny.
I mean, instead of like, oh, fuck, where's that fucking whatever that I left somewhere, because there's stuff all over the property. But I'm always like, all day long, I find myself going, oh, yeah, that's that. Oh, yeah, that's that. And the more it falls together and the less that I have to like co-conspirator even with my own self about, oh, well, that's fucked up, I can't believe it. That doesn't happen anymore. And I just keep moving.
So your own self as a co-conspirator doesn't
Yeah.
exist except to the thinking you do about it and imagine it to be.
Right.
And the things don't fall apart. And the idea that being familiar with the pain is comforting is another one of those twisted thoughts. So I'm challenging you a little bit
Yeah, do.
to look at, we can manage these things by bringing balance to them. That's certainly something we can do. We can feel better about those things we're doing, but they're all reflecting that we're still thinking something that's worse, that if considered accurately would completely evaporate the need to constantly manage those things. The unmanageability in step one isn't about the fact that we can't control alcohol. It's the thought that we have that we can continue to control and enjoy it that has no power. That's the powerlessness, is seeing that there's no substance in that thought. And when I entertain the thought as true, what do? Try to prove it's true by drinking more. I drink out of control to prove I have control. It's the same with the thinking. If I think I'm going to think my way into ways to make myself feel better and not notice that there must be something worse I'm trying to feel better about, I'm learning to navigate somewhat. I'm learning to walk on ground that's unstable and stabilize my walking and all that kind of stuff. But if right next to the unstable ground I was walking on is a perfectly smooth path, and I continue to think that because I've gotten so good at walking on the unstable ground that I don't even notice the smooth path, I'm probably undermining my greater capacity to start functioning on a level that is absolutely natural and absolutely knowing, and won't have those things forgotten. You'll start to remember quicker. Like we've talked about in the past, about my sense is we all know where we leave things. We were the ones that left them. How could we not know? We can think we don't know. But if you simply remember that you know and stop thinking about it, you'll get a thought in a short period of time, typically, that will tell you exactly where that thing is, because you were there when you left it. Who knows better than we do what we do when we lose something? People say, I don't know where I left it. I can't find it. I don't know where I left it. I can't. We're arguing, Anthony, again, we're using the stories to support the contention that the lie is true, and wondering why we continue to go down that path in all these different ways and think we're going to get somewhere.
Yes.
And even when we arrive there, we say, this isn't it. I didn't think it'd be this way. I thought it'd be some other way.
Right.
So now is a moment, and the moment of the moment, meaning the momentum of the moment, the momentousness of the moment, is present always. It's exactly where we are. It's full. Jesus did a lot of talking about this, by the way. If you read what he said, and Alcoholics Anonymous came out of a wave of Christian pastors who started to say, why is it that we're all Christians and we're all fighting over which form of Christianity we're representing? And one of the guys, or some of the guys, said, that's not, let's think about what Jesus said. It was about healing, forgiveness, and love. It wasn't about hatred and contempt and trying to figure out how to spite each other and get vengeance on each other and how to be better than each other and all that kind of stuff. It was about incorporation, inclusion. And that means
that's exactly what I was.
Your symmetry, Jana, that synchronous notion of saying, oh, everything isn't falling in place. What's falling are the ideas I used to have about things being out of place. They're always in place. Everything's always in perfect order. Nature's been doing what nature's been doing as long as nature's been doing what nature's been doing within this universe. And I would consider the universe is small and limited compared to the infinite conversation that we're having, where there are no limits whatsoever, not even temporary limits, not a forever that is growing into it like the universe seems to be doing by always expanding, because there's even a very clear supposition that it will expand to a point before it starts to contract again. And the stars reveal that. They get to a point where they burn their energy out and they contract back into the black holes. If they're big enough, they turn into a black hole, which seems to pull light out of the universe, which it just converts it to radiation and sends it back.
It reminds me of that joke where the kid wants to leave home because he doesn't like his parents. So at 18, he leaves home and he comes back like 3 years later and he says, I can't believe how much wiser you guys have gotten in just 3 years.
Right. Well, now think about this experience we're having. And one of the things that really struck me this past week was that probably the best way to look at it, and part of it came from a conversation I had with Lensis and also Gabe, is that looking at our relationships with other people give us perspective of the relationship we're having with that seeming self we have. Because the primary relationship we have is with this self that we make up and talk to and talk about. And it's literally the imaginary friend we had as a kid that all of a sudden, as we get older, we think is real because we've been imagining it so long. So we think it has a sense of permanence because of the amount of time. And yet it becomes this sort of demonic inner conflict that we're struggling with all the time, that we're constantly trying to appease and constantly trying to fix and constantly trying to feel better than. And in fact, it's just a thought about a thought that we're having. When we think to ourselves, we are really thinking to our thoughts. When we think about ourselves, we are really thinking about our thoughts. To clarify the basic functional issues that we are doing is to notice how that thought about thought being reality has infected our opinion of what's actually happening. But if we can't see the experience we're having internally because it's invisible, think of that. Substance, we look at life forms, we look at the appearance of things, how things look. We don't look at the substance. We don't see the cancer. We don't see the disease. We don't see the heart beating and the blood flowing and all the healthy things either. We see the effect of that, which is the form. It's the projection of all those things, which is the form. But if the things we are witnessing are effects that we feel, then the effects are telling us about the cause. If we're feeling depressed, we're thinking depressing thoughts. And what would they be? Trying to make something out of nothing. What would that be? Making matter. What's matter? Something that weighs something, obstructs something. In this universe, matter occupies space. Means that if the sun is shining, it's going to create a shadow. It casts shadows of doubt in our experience. We get haunted by the feelings because of the darkness that's created, the shadows that are created. We don't know what's lurking in those shadows. And yet we create those shadows and think we don't know what's lurking there. Addictive thinking turns everything backwards, so it looks like it's happening to us rather than being caused by us. But looking at our relationships, what I found and continue to find is that I have a lot of petty thoughts about people. I have a lot of thoughts that I think are absolutely true about them, which is an indication that I think my thinking is still true and real. And what it leads to is a sense of contempt for them, which is, it isn't judgment that's faulty. It's the idea that it's true that it all of a sudden turns into contempt and spite and hatred and loathing. Well, if I can do that with somebody else that I see, it's exactly what I'm doing in my own experience internally that I'm trying to get rid of. That's the addiction. The compulsion is trying to do it to someone else. Just like I thought if I drank something or shot something or snorted something or popped something or dropped something, I would feel better by the result because the effect felt better, when in fact what I was doing was covering up the thinking that got me to the point that I thought I needed to feel better because the thinking was worse. So if the nature of nature is natural, that is our nature, yours and mine, everyone's. Not anyone could be excluded from that if it's actually natural. Doesn't mean that some people don't think in more violent terms or haven't gone further down the road that we're going down. But if they're on the same road, then we recognize that road and can recognize that illness, regardless of how well developed it is, as the same thing that we do in our own experience. And we can become complementary in their experience rather than contemptful and spiteful and hateful and reactive and overbearing or ignorant. Literally ignoring what we are doing is what they're doing, and ignoring them is what we're doing, and starting to see them as separate and alone and distinct and hateful and spiteful and worth hating and spiting. So our relationships are perfect gauges to start to say, if I have those thoughts, if I have those feelings, I'm having those thoughts. And start to notice this interactive potential we have to thank people for instigating our thinking and seeing that it's the nature of our own thinking that's really causing the opinions we're creating about them. We can thank them rather than say, my experience is you leave relationships saying thank you or fuck you. You're either happy for the benefit or you're sad or you're angry for the effect. And if we are the cause of all those effects and it is our source that's doing it, it doesn't mean what's happening is right. But if we look at it as wrong, the source of the problem as we're seeing it is starting with the wrong we're doing, because nothing impacts us greater than the thinking we do, because it is closer to the pain and pleasure zones and our own functional capacity than anyone can ever get. Nobody can hurt our feelings more than we hurt the ones we experience. So when people say you're hurting my feelings, I would say they're actually doing their best to disown the feelings they're having that are hurt. They're trying to dispossess themselves of those things by claiming you're the responsible party. And relationships built on this idea that someone does what I want to have them. It's built on this idea. Did I just echo myself?
No, you're good.
If the thinking I'm doing is built on the idea that I'm not the one doing it, I'm going to see that other person is doing it to me. And if I'm asking them not to do those things, they now become complicitous in the undoing that I'm trying to do that's impossible, rather than the acknowledgement that it's my thinking that's causing the whole episode to begin with. It's backward. It doesn't mean what they're doing is wrong, right? It doesn't mean that people aren't doing things wrong. It means they're doing exactly what I'm doing when I'm thinking it's only them and not me. Not my own choices, not my own mental debility. Instability. Welcome, JP.
I just think people find comfort in rules, and it causes exclusivity. Like even that church that I go to, they're lovely and so nice and everything, but they're pretty sure I'm going to go to hell if I don't get christened. And it's so contrary. But it gives them comfort in the fact that if you do a certain amount of things a certain way, you're going to have everlasting life.
But seeing about them what's wrong is seeing in you the wrong you can find, that you must also be nurturing to some degree. You wouldn't see it. You would see it as a compassionate, you would see it as something they're doing that they're just doing, it's just a thought they're having, rather than seeing it as something intrinsic to the wrong you're seeing.
It's not very heavy. I still go and I still hang out with them and we interact, and it's a loving situation. But there still is that little tinge of it. They're super cool to me, and they know that I'm not down with getting dunked in the water because I already have been. But it just is funny that there's rules, because the rest of it, 99% of it's completely open and loving and positive and supportive and lovely. But there's that one little thing. I would just do it their way, because, there is the coming, and then they get to raise up and I'm just going to be there frying.
So that thing they do does not interfere with that absolute state of being that you know and I know and we share.
Right.
And seeing that way begins to reckon with the fact that it's what people are thinking that's causing the havoc, not what's actually happening in reality. It's this seeming reality that causes that. It sounds to me like you're noticing that and not condemning them for it. You're just noticing it's happening, and it's odd.
They're the sweetest people ever, and they have a little band, and they're really sincere, and they have people, often they have foreigners come over because the pastor's from France, and he's a world-class windsurfer. He was in the Olympics or something crazy, and they're super lovely and super pretty much not judgmental, but that one thing, just that one little thing.
Well, it doesn't take a lot for people to be doing everything they can to look like they're not doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I grew up learning to behave better than I felt. And that's just another way of not expressing what's happening in the name of thinking how appearance is better than how substance is.
Oh.
So again, I used to, God is love was painted on the church in all the churches I went to. And I used to wonder and ask my mom, why don't these people act that way?
Yeah.
They're like pissed half the time if you don't do what they think you should do, and she sort of was aligned with them because there was a certain piety to it and this sort of attribute that if you act that way, you feel that way. And my experience was people didn't feel that way at all. They just acted that way to try and look like they felt that way. But underneath, if I tipped back in my chair, that was a major breach of protocol. Like it seemed to me I was tipping back in a chair. It didn't seem to me to be a breach of protocol at all. But,
Right.
at 4, it's a little bit less, we're a little less discerning than 64.
Discerning's a great word. That's my newest word for the last 30 days. When a Christian guy told me that, he goes, well, I'm very discerning. And I said, are you now?
Yeah.
Discerning with his lack of love, with his little, but you know what? It gives him comfort. He's super smart, and
No, I would say, Jana, it doesn't give him comfort. It actually continues to maintain the idea that by maintaining that fight, he's going to win that battle, and he's not.
Oh, he's going to live forever. Are you kidding?
Yeah.
And I'm going to burn, and he's sad about it.
Yeah. So those things do not rest well in us at all. They're anything that isn't to suggest people can't or shouldn't do what they're doing.
Right.
I'm not trying to proclaim anybody shouldn't be doing what they're doing, because the fact is everyone's doing exactly what they're doing, whether they should or shouldn't be doing it. It's should or shouldn't doesn't come into the equation as to what people are doing. What they're doing is what they're doing, and to simply look at that they're doing it rather than what they should be doing and how they should be doing it and why they're doing it, and all that other stuff just leads to more questions that never seem to be answered, because the question is questionable to be looking at things that are insane and wondering why we can't make sanity out of it. We become insane thinking about it rather than just say, well, they're certainly doing what they're doing, and that we can accept and come to terms with. And people are allowed to do that. We have that freedom to be able to do that. But the freedom we have to think does not mean what we think creates a sense or effect of freedom. Just like we can think we're right and not be right. It doesn't make it right simply because we think it's right. If it is right, it doesn't require us to think of it. It just is right, period. And what would right be but nature and an absolute state of being that isn't contestable? And yet we can contest it. It just doesn't have any impact on it. The impact is on our own experience. The idea that fight's someday going to win, and we just keep dragging and dragging and dragging. To a degree, I suspect we all do those things to the degree that we're reactive and that we get depressed and that we get sort of feeling out of sort, and we get heavy and feel that weight and get tired and exhausted. And I certainly experience all those things at times, which tells me I've still got some reckoning and accounting to do.
Okay, well, I'm going to confess to something that I did that wasn't so nice. There's a gal on the mainland from Long Beach Huntington Beach that was supposed to send these surfboards over, and I was helping with them. But my thing was I hadn't met her previously, and I was going to help in the fact that I had a trailer to pick up the surfboards, and I could help get them to where they needed to be and find viable people to receive them, because it was from, fire victims. And a friend put us together and said, hey, Janet could probably help, blah, blah. Well, then the gal, for lack of anything better to do, started calling, and it would be like an hour and a half of just blabbing. And then, 2 weeks ended up being 3 weeks, and I literally am on the phone maybe, I don't know, once every couple weeks or something. I live a pretty quiet life, and I was not feeling great one day, and she called like 6 times in a row. And so finally I just answered. I go, what? I texted you and said I wasn't feeling well and I didn't want to talk. And she goes, I know, but I needed to talk to you. And it was like so just blatantly like not even caring about that. Anyway, I ended up the last time she called telling her to fuck off. I want to have nothing to do with the surfboards, and that she just had way too many words. And I found someone else to help her. And it was kind of astonishing to me, because I don't even know when the last time I ever did something like that to anybody. Like years of just like fuck it, I'm over you. I'm not going to do this anymore. And she's texted and emailed and, tried to defend it. And I'm just not proud of it at all. Believe me, I'm not proud of it. But
well, think of the time it took to come to terms with what is happening is denial of what was happening while you were coming to terms with it.
yeah, like 6 weeks of her yapping at me, and I would only answer every maybe fifth phone call, but it would go back to like 1947 and 1955 and the history of her grandfather's avocado. Her son. So much information that didn't mean anything to anybody other than her. She just needed an audience. And
if the thing that frustrated you was your unwillingness to be honest early on,
right. I lured her into a false sense of security by listening the first few weeks.
you thought you were going to buy her off and you were going to go along. That's the conspirator right there. You're going to take her hostage. You're going to play by her terms because she's going to get better. And the thing you want is going to get done. And it isn't honest to be engaged in those relationships that way. And at least we can say something doesn't feel right about this to me. So I want to diffuse this idea that they're gaining momentum, you're gaining momentum, and this thing is getting traction, because most of that stuff is all based on adrenaline and excitement and nervousness and this sort of treachery that's a little dangerous and all that kind of stuff that gives us this sense of importance. But the import is basically despair and frustration and aggravation.
I felt so trapped. And I said a few times to her, I go, I'm not really a big phone person. And unless it's relevant to Maui and the fire, I'm honestly not interested. And I go, it's not what you want to hear. You want an audience and you want me to be a certain way because you've created how you want me to be. And I'm thoroughly not interested in what you have to say anymore.
But you clearly were interested enough to be frustrated.
Yeah.
And continue to maintain some form of interaction that wasn't honest enough to diffuse the problem.
Correct. But it worked when I just said fuck up and blocked their number, and which I know it wasn't very adult. I don't think there could have been a solution though, because
well, of course, since there wasn't, that would be the logical way to feel reasonable about what happened.
I don't feel bad about it at all. I feel free. I really do feel free. I mean,
well,
that was.
I'm pointing to the story that you're telling, and it's largely focused on what she's doing rather than seeing that you were the culprit and actually allowing her to do that and thinking that somehow it would get better while you were witnessing it to the point that you had to explode with her. That was building up the whole time. And
kind of astonishing.
Yes, good. Because
really
my sense is, Jana, we become so desensitized that it takes things to get to an extreme point to where we're finally willing to be honest, but we're not willing to be honest when it's just subtle and we don't like it. We think there's still some gap in there that we're going to fix and we're going to manage and we're going to make better, rather than saying, look, if we're going to do this, here are the expectations I typically live by. Because here are the thoughts that I would like to have in place. If you say something, do that thing. If you don't want to do that thing, don't say that thing. Because I'm not in it. If you say it and don't do it, I'm going to mention to you that you didn't do it. And if you don't like hearing that from me, then do the thing you say. And if you don't, you're going to hear that thing from me. And start to speak in a way that gives people a little bit of an advance notice that whatever they've been pulling on other people isn't going to happen with you.
Well, I think that whole thing about that, I think that maybe you had taught me or us or whatever. I think just the statement, this is what I'm willing to do, and then outlining it.
Yes.
And without having to criticize anyone or saying like, this is annoying to me.
Or justify it.
Yeah, yes, the justifying thing. I never, ever, ever want to justify or have to defend. I just don't want
to never want to justify is justifying. So it's the fact is you're not going to escape those things that are possible because they're possible. And the difference is beginning to simply be as honest as you can, and it starts to reduce things. If you have the free will, Jenna, to think whatever you want,
right,
you have no reason to justify anything, but you can if you want. You can explain to people why you're doing it, or you can simply say, look, this is how I'm thinking about it now. It may change. If it doesn't, begin to understand that this is how I'm thinking. You don't have to like it and you don't have to agree with it, but I can certainly share it as my experience now, as my thought now, not my reality, my truth, my this, my that, to make it seem as though it's so intractable that it will never change, because then I feel like I need to, representing the self I think I am, continue to enforce this thing, or it's going to damage my reputation, which, when my reputation is already based on a lie. That's not, what's the damage? How much more can I damage it?
True.
So the simplicity of it is just saying, look, this is what I'm thinking now. And something feels off kilter. When I started speaking more honestly, I started noticing that I really did notice things were wrong. I had a clear understanding of it. I didn't exactly know where I didn't know where all the pinpricks were, but I could certainly mention that this feels like a really prickly situation that I'm about to get into. And I don't particularly like prickly situations. So if there's anything going on that you're not mentioning, I would rather know it now than later, because if I find out later, it's going to make it that much more difficult, because by then I will have been pricked by the pin. And it wakes people up.
She woke up all right. She left her wig.
To become desensitized is to allow people to maintain the dream of their own state of dream that they're making believe is reality, and giving the impression that you're in the dream with them.
Yeah.
That's that conspirator thing, where all of a sudden we're playing the part they want us to play by being the dupe. And it's very frustrating to get to a point where you realize, wow, what I realized is all that time where that explosion was building was denial in motion. It was my defense. It was my denial. It was my thinking what was happening wasn't happening that was causing this buildup. And there's nobody that has a greater impact on my experience than my thinking.
Yes, agreed. And,
So-
it goes beyond that, because maybe in the beginning I thought that being, I don't want to say co-conspirator with her, but being affiliated with her, it might be kind of fun, if I went to California, because she's like 5 years older than me. She's like 71 or something, and born and raised on the beach her whole life. So we had familiarities. And so my little movie, which was different than her little movie, could have had some ego in there too. So I gave her more leeway than I would have. And
It could have had.
well, it did, clearly. And
Keep in mind, ego in its actual definition is I. The way we use ego, though, is the false self, which is the small self, the ideas we have about self. So even the word ego is used backward from its actual original Greek and Latin roots.
Yeah.
So anything that's false thought to be true is egoistic, all of it, because we think it has a life of its own. Well, if we think our thoughts have a life of their own, then we think we are the life of those thoughts, that our life depends on those thoughts. And if that isn't true, that's insanity masquerading as reality, which is exactly what insanity does. Just like any thought to be true, all of a sudden has impacts and manifestations. And we feel a desperate commitment to maintain those things because of our own lack of ease that's created in our experience, manifest as a result of entertaining those thoughts as true and real. We can have any of the thoughts and be free of them. It's once we start thinking they're the only thing we can do that we've decided that they're reality and truth. The interesting thing is, reality and truth is the only thing that's ever happening. And it isn't even happening in the way that we talk about things happening. It's just an ever-present conscious awareness that is ever present, always the source of everyone and everything that's happening. What's happening and what's possible is a product of that ever-present source. If the basis of our experience is stable, and that's where the thinking comes from that makes the choices to act and do, then the thinking becomes stable rather than destabilized and constantly trying to bring balance back to it and stabilize the imbalance that we've created. The thinking is naturally stable. That's what intuition is. Knowledge beyond reason. We just know what to do. And as we allow ourselves to be honest, it becomes perfectly clear that we're walking into a trap that we're actually willing to walk into and setting off to blame the other person because we may not be ready to concede our involvement to the degree that we're involved, which I would suggest is 100% all the time, always. If you start thinking that you're always responsible 100%, all the debates over who's doing what start to dissipate because there's no room for
I
it.
take responsibility 100%, absolutely 100%. And I honestly am not blaming her. I'm just was kind of confessing to you and my co-conspirators that it was very poor behavior on my part.
Well, I'm not talking about her now or
Oh,
you.
yeah.
I'm talking about us and the common nature of how this thinking works. And the fact that we attach it to the stories in our own experience as though it's unique to us, but it's exactly the same thing in all the stories that are told. Because if it doesn't work and it is thought to work, what's working is dysfunction, and what's working is insanity, and what's working is something that doesn't even exist, which is complete fantasy acting as reality. And if that's the case for me, it's the case for you, given that we're all built on the same platform.
That's why we need co-conspirators to proliferate the fantasy.
Well, it isn't that we need them. We use them to justify it's not us. It's not me doing it, it's them. That's why the conversation started with, if we're having a relationship with ourself that's corrupt, if the corrupted idea of self is corrupt to begin with, every one of our other relationships is going to contain seeds and kernels of that corrupt nature. Every one of them.
Yep.
So if the essence of our essence is our essence, there's nothing about reality that's ever going to fall apart, because it can't fall apart. It's not even together. It's not apart, it's not together. It's an element and an essence that is impossible to define. If you read the thing that I included from Einstein today in the announcement, it said physical concepts are the creation of the human mind, meaning the brain, and are not, however it may seem, determined by the exterior world. They don't have any legitimacy. We're seeing them as we're designed to see things, not as they are. How they are has substance, and there's, like, even in the big book, it talks about the swirling mass of atoms beneath everything. That's their substance. We don't see those things, but they are there regardless of whether we see them. So to think we're not doing what we're doing is to think that the substance of things is not there, and all that is there is a form. And that's exactly what ego is, a projection of ideas and illusions all of a sudden becoming reality. He goes on, though, to say, in our endeavor to understand reality, we are somewhat like a man trying to understand the mechanisms of a closed watch. He can see the hands move and hear its ticking, but he has no way of opening the case. If he's ingenious, he may form some picture of a mechanism, which could be responsible for all the things he observes, but he will never be quite sure his picture is the only one which could explain his observation. We will never be able to compare his pictures he will never be able to compare his pictures with the real mechanism, and he cannot even imagine the possibility of the meaning of such a comparison. So he's talking about, Einstein also said, you cannot fix a problem with the same thinking that created it. He's talking about, within the context of thought, what seems to be outside of thought seems to be impossible to conceive of, and yet we experience the effects. So we can begin to identify the cause based on the effects, the disturbances, the disruptions, the complications, the lack of simplicity, the feeling of uneasiness, the discomfort, all of those things, the spite, the condemnation, all of the ideas we have about other people are coming out of the thoughts we have that we think are true. Why? Because we loathe the self we think we are, and we hold that self in contempt because it is condemned, because it has no basis other than my constant thinking about it. And as soon as I stop thinking about it, it has no basis at all, even in my thinking. So if that is the case, self-loathing is actually loathing a self that doesn't exist, but is only thought to exist. What I'm loathing is the thinking I'm doing about that self. And if that's a fundamental experience I'm having in my own witness and observation of this seeming self that I think I am, that is exactly what I'm doing in every other relationship I have to every other thing and every other one that exists. So looking at the relationship starts to give me a little bit of a clue as to what I'm actually creating in my own thinking. and the impact of it. If I'm looking at it, it becomes a roadmap and a guide and a textbook to the thinking I can't seem to see the substance of, but I can see the effects and the perspective I'm getting from the relationships I have. Morning, Jackie. We are always where we are as we are now as humans. In an absolute sense, since there's no time or space in that, it isn't here and now, it's just ever present. Just seems to be that way to us, just the way Einstein was discussing the world we see, is the world we see based on the bodies we have and how our bodies are capable of seeing things. That's what those things appear to be. But in fact, what they are is what they are, despite how we see them or how we think of them. That distinction doesn't need to be made, but until it's reckoned with and seen, it seems as though all things are is what we think of them, and all things are is how we see them, and all people are is what we think of them and how we see them, rather than recognizing their substance. So here's what's interesting about substance and understanding. We started to get to this earlier. But substance is a foundation. Understanding is a foundation. It's beneath where we stand. Our stance and our standing is we see what's invisible through understanding as humans. If we're misunderstanding what we see, we're not seeing what's invisible. We're seeing illusions created as thoughts, as reality. So we're turning imagination into reality. Now, imagination is a great asset until we make believe it's not what it is and think of it as something that it isn't, which is to think of imagination as reality. Imagination as imagination is imagination. There's no conflict there. But when imagination is thought of as reality and truth, that's a conflict, because reality and truth doesn't have any gap in it. It has no, it doesn't need to be fulfilled because it's the fulfillment of everything that exists. So any disorder in the thinking creates disorders in our body, our physical experience, mental disorders, anxious disorders, metabolic disorders, physical disorders, etc. We're not healing, we're actually inflicting the disease on our experience, and our body succumbs to it because we insist it prove it's not us, it's my body. I have a body, but I don't think I have anything to do with it, and so I think whatever happens in my body is happening to me rather than being caused by me. That's pure addiction of thought. The idea that the only thing I can do is the worst thing I can do. And that since I don't think I'm doing what I'm doing, I also think there is nothing I can do about what's happening. When in fact, I'm creating what's happening. I'm primary to the creation of what's happening to my experience. If I didn't exist, I wouldn't be. The fact that I do, I am. We are as we are, fully responsible, 100%. Doesn't mean I have to take responsibility, and to the degree I think I take it, it's going to be limited to what I think I'm taking, rather than absolute in terms of just being a natural part of nature, just like truth and reality is a natural part of nature. Responsibility is a natural part of human nature. We are responsible, 100%, each of us, all of us, every one of us. So when it seems hard to imagine that you're responsible for everything, just realize that that is also shared with everything and everyone. So it doesn't seem quite as impossible, but it can also seem pretty impractical that everybody else could be doing at the same time what we're doing now, and or being what we are now. Can start to challenge some of the thinking, which makes the thinking again the culprit, not in fact the being and the knowing. So the goal here is just to begin, one of the goals is to begin to distinguish the thinking we do from the knowing we have, and the knowing we are in that sense. We wouldn't know it's wrong so quickly if we didn't have an awareness of what's wrong. If all we were was what we thought, then all we thought would lead up to a fulfillment and contentment and stability. It doesn't seem to. So it's probably a window that could be opened a little wider. And just because we don't think the window's open doesn't mean it's open. And just because we may not welcome the thoughts does not mean the door is closed and or that there's even a door. All of the visuals that we create to justify that the door has to be open before we see are all narratives we use to suggest that somehow when the door is closed, we don't know there's anything on the other side of it. So now what?
Well,
What are we going to come up with to fill the void, the silence? You know, my second wife, who is quite brilliant, and I really appreciate her a lot, and she remarried the man that she divorced to marry me, and he stayed with her, you know, most loyal man I've ever known. I call him my husband-in-law. He's a great guy. But she sent me something yesterday that said silent and listen, and they're both the same letters. And I didn't get it. I saw it and I thought, it's funny because I was doing a talk while I got the text and looked at it, and I thought maybe I should be silent and listen, but I was the one talking. But then I realized they're both spelled, they're just a different spelling of the same letters.
yeah, that's cool. Is there a name for that? Is that called something like an anagram or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think palindrome in numbers is when the numbers are the same forward and backwards, but these aren't actually in an order. I tried to figure the order out.
Of course you did.
And I'll bet, yeah. Well,
It's doing it.
but it seems like there's always a rhythm in numbers and math and all that kind of stuff that things follow. And certainly it's like live backward is evil and devil backward is lived. So some of the words we have seem to replicate the opposing forces we seem to be fighting. And if we've created the words to do that, and words are a function of a brain, not a function of a knowing. A knowing being doesn't have words, it has presence. It has a knowing nature that doesn't need to think, doesn't need words to define what it thinks because it already knows. It knows. It's a very different thing than the thinking we do that we think we know. But our words are very revealing in that way. And I thought it was very interesting. It came at a very interesting point during the day, but silence would be the nature of an absolute source because it wouldn't have a voice. It would simply know. It knows and be aware it's aware. It doesn't take a voice to do that. It doesn't take words to do that. It doesn't take rationale or thought. So there's no reason in knowing. There's no thinking in knowing. There's no process in knowing. It's just an ever-present state of awareness and knowing awareness. So I'll take the silence as knowing that we know. We know. Any other thoughts? Now that we're in the knowing silence of awareness? Discipline is an interesting word because in one respect it means punitive punishment, in the other respect it means practice. Every artist, every great sports person, everybody who's good at anything tends to practice typically more than people who think they want to be good at that thing and don't do anything about it. So the practice that we have, the discipline that we have, is a chance to notice that our experience is constantly giving us all the information we need in the present, Anthony. All the information we need in the present is present to
Right.
determine what it is that's causing us to think that we need more, that we're less, or any of those other things. It's all there. All of the kernels of that essence are there, including the thoughts that are errant, thinking about things that aren't true to be true. They're all present. Doesn't mean they have validity, doesn't mean they have substance. It doesn't mean that they're true. It simply means that they're being entertained as truth. They're thoughts. Thoughts can imagine anything, including that impossible is possible and possibility is impossible. Those are things thoughts can have. But if impossible is impossible, it's impossible, so you're never going to see it happen. What you're going to see is a lot of grief trying to make it happen. And if all that's possible is possible, and we start conceding that, the chances are we're going to start doing things not only that are possible, but start to express possibility before we even notice that we're doing much, effortlessly, in a way that just creates and manifests and aligns and is contagious in the same way that we think everyone else is reactive and hurtful and harmful and hard to overcome and hard to fix, and nobody's ever going to think this way, and all that stuff we can assign to the totality of everyone, and start seeing everyone as absolutely capable and absolutely able and absolutely willing and absolutely hungry for an experience that's fulfilling and satisfying and generous and abundant and forgiving rather than forgetting. Rather than act like we're in a dream, start to recognize that the adventure of our actual awareness is much more fulfilling than any dream because it's actual and factual, rather than simply a consolidation of chronic thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking about thinking and wondering why we're thinking so damn much and why it doesn't feel good and why we're anxious and stressed and irritable, restless, discontent, mentally anguished, emotionally turmoiled, inner conflicted, outer conflicted. Those are choices that we are free to make. And the freedom from them comes from admitting the freedom of making them. For free to make them, it doesn't make them right. And it doesn't mean that they will not create condemnation or a sense of condemnation in our experience. But that sense is not who we are. It doesn't condemn us. It condemns our experience to an awareness that what we are thinking is condemned. Very different approach to thinking it is who we are. We're condemned. I'm condemned. Stay away from that because it hurts me too much. Don't get near that. Rather than, thank you for getting near that. I appreciate being able to see the thing I'm doing clearly, which gives me the chance to have it. And by having it, gives it the chance to dissipate rather than make believe I don't have it and think of it as something that seems to have me. So the discipline is just practice. And I would say our relationships are really where the practice comes in and is most obvious. If the nature of nature is love, it's a good chance we love everyone we know. We just don't think we do. We don't like everything they do. And we've confused like for love and forgot that we have the right to tell anyone, like Jana was saying, anyone that we just don't like the way they're operating. We don't have any obligation to like how somebody operates. And we can still love them and have those feelings of dislike and start to see that that distinction is simply a thought. It isn't reality. It isn't truth. And we're more than welcome to have those thoughts. And there's no condemnation in them when we simply express them as thoughts rather than our truth and our reality and something someone must do, should do. And if they don't do, they're an idiot. And we think we need to have revenge and get back at them for that thing. And the thing we're trying to get back at them for is the thing we're doing in our own experience. So emotional sobriety would be operating on that basis. We're sober because we're free from the sense of condemnation that we think we are by starting to see that any thought we have that isn't true is simply condemned because it has no basis. It isn't condemned to die because it hasn't even ever lived. It's the idea that it has life that condemns us in terms of our experience. It doesn't condemn us, it condemns the thinking we're doing and choosing. Because there's no life to it. It's not going to become alive. We can maintain it as long as we want, but it will take that maintenance to maintain the impression that it even exists. But the impressions get depressing the longer we maintain them. To your explosive point, Jana, as it builds, there are ticking time bombs in our experience. Pressure, 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 pressure. Eventually, even a pressure cooker, if it gets hot enough, the lid's going to blow. So being honest about what we're seeing doesn't mean we're telling someone what's wrong with them. It means we're sharing with them our thoughts that may well be wrong. And honesty doesn't need us to be right about our thinking, just accurate about what we're thinking. Our thinking can be wrong, and we can still be accurate about our expression in telling someone. Simply saying, this is a thought I have about you. Doesn't make it right, doesn't make it real. It's just a thought I'm having. Much easier to digest and talk about when it's presented as it is, rather than as we presume it should be or it is when we think it's real and true. That about it for the day, kids?
Yeah, I feel better. Thanks.
Well, Anthony, if you're looking at some of what you're doing, you're probably not going to feel better. It's okay to feel disturbed. If we're doing something that's disturbing and we feel disturbed, that's an alignment
Right.
with that thing. Starting to see that we don't have to be right to be accurate. We can be right about wrong by being accurate about wrong. A lie is a lie is a lie. It's just like Gertrude Stein's a rose is a rose is a rose.
What about cannibals?
I think that's what we do in our own experience by thinking we can perfect a self that doesn't exist. We end up cannibalizing our own experience. And even cannibals were never thought to eat themselves. So that's that shows how destructive this form of thinking can be.
Good point.
But even humans, Jackie, have thought of cannibals as being one of the most despicable things to do. And yet we gobble ourselves up in anxiety. We undermine our ability to function in all the different ways that we attach to and make believe are true, and end up devouring literally our capacity to function and express the abundance of our nature. Doesn't make what we're doing real. It makes it unhealthy and sick and demented while we think it is the only thing we can do. So that describes many people that function on a very dysfunctional basis that are pathological and harm people in the name of feeling better because they like seeing the harm in someone else so they can avoid thinking about the harm they're doing in their own experience.
It's funny. I feel good, but I know as soon as we get off this call, I'm going to start thinking about something that's bothering me. I mean, my mind literally can't wait to go down that direction. Like, what is wrong and what is right? What am I going to change? I want to change something.
So, Anthony, notice the addiction in that. Notice the idea that if you do it,
it's like, can we get off this freaking Zoom call so I could start worrying about something, please?
Yeah. But just
I've
begin
got things to worry
consider.
about right now, you guys.
This is an illness. It is a mental illness.
Yeah, because we could do 2 hours of talking about it and then like, okay, I got to get off because there's some things I need to worry about right now. Really worry about, not just worry. There's things I worry about and then really worry about.
So, Anthony, the things you worry about generally have no basis in reality. So the fact is, it's a choice you're making.
Yeah, that took freaking 3 years. If you could just save me 3 years, right? If I would have just bid onto that, said, you're right, What do you want to do now?
Well, think of the even sicker thought that you've known it all along and just been acting like you didn't.
Well, I'm not
The
there yet.
idea, that's the idea that we're in control, that we have power, that we're managing things that literally don't exist. They do not exist. Out of control literally means no control whatsoever. Powerless means no power whatsoever in the first step. It doesn't mean powerless, less power. It means powerless, no power. Why? Because the idea was a lie that we could control and enjoy our drinking. The idea is a lie that we can control and enjoy a lie.
How about this? How about when this buddy of mine kept saying, you know what the truth is? You know what the truth is? If I would have been honest with him and said, no, nobody really knows the truth. I
But
never said
Anthony,
that. I was trying to figure it
If
out.
you've been listening, we all know the truth, which is exactly why we suffer. If we didn't know the truth, we would not know what's wrong. We would not be holding the self we think we are in contempt, because we know better than to make believe that making believe is reality. We can make believe all we want. Seeing it as making believe doesn't have any impact because we know it's make believe. Seeing illusions has no impact. We know they're illusions. Seeing it as reality isn't even an illusion. It's fantasy acting as reality. It's insanity. That's the whole point of this. It does not take any, we do not need to be driven to insanity to begin to recognize that it's where we are when we're entertaining those thoughts. And I would suggest humanity is entertaining thoughts that are not true historically and have been the whole time, to be acting the way we do and thinking there's nothing we can do about it. Think about that. When you start talking about world peace and satisfying world hunger, we've always had enough food, not everyone's always eaten. Now, there may have been times that it was possible that people couldn't get to where the food was because they lived in areas that were barren and desolate and so forth.
Yeah.
But in modern times, we have more than enough capacity to deliver and to function on a level that would actually provide that food, and we don't. Now, I'm not suggesting we should or we shouldn't. I'm simply stating the fact that we aren't.
Yes.
And to come to terms with how things are is a lot different than making believe they should be one way or another when they're not.
I don't know why this, I'm reminded of this, but the other day there's like this bellhop station where I guess you can rent scooters, some type of scooter. So this guy comes up on a walker, an old man, he could barely understand him, and he's trying to ask about a scooter rental, and he's got a big problem. And they're like, what? He goes, how am I going to get this? He goes, can I ride the scooter up to my room, my hotel room? And they go, yeah. And he goes, well, what am I going to do with my walker though? Like, it was just so, I'm not explaining it quite right, but his problem, you could tell he was trying to work out a problem that there's probably not the right problem. Anybody that's in a walker going to rent a scooter, and he couldn't figure out what to do with his walker after. We were all kind of laughing to ourselves for some reason because we
Sounds like
knew
an
that
episode from Jackass.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I was being punked because he really purposely could bear. He looked like he was playing an old man, and he was having a problem where he's going to put his walker when he's riding the scooter, and get to. And then he was worried that they had brought it to the room last time, and it was like we were all kind of hold back from laughing. I think for some reason.
So, Anthony, it's easy to see absurdity in others.
Yeah.
It may be worth noticing the absurdity in your own experience.
Yeah, I think that's why I was bringing it up. It's like to him, it made perfect sense.
I'm just trying to bring the story back to the point.
Yeah.
So if the absurdity is present and we're acting as though it isn't absurd, and we're acting as though there's some reason for it and some rationale for it, we're coming up with all that stuff. That's just another way of expressing denial. It's just another defensive, automatic, reactive behavior.
Yeah.
And the fact is, if this absolute state of being and awareness and knowledge exists, it's our natural state, whether we think it is or not. That's the insanity of it. It doesn't go away when we think it's not there. It doesn't go away when we think we're controlling it. It doesn't change when we think we have power over it at all. It still stays the natural state of our being, not a place to get, not a place to go, not a place to, not something.
It changes once we admit it is the weird part. Like talking about going to
all
being
that
crazy.
All that changes is our thinking.
Well, you can't be crazy if you tell them you think you're crazy. They're like, well, obviously you're not crazy if you think you're crazy. So it's kind of funny by admitting it.
So to think it's sane to be wondering when you get off this call, what you're going to start worrying about is to miss the point of the insanity in the present and say, that's insane to be thinking this. That is actually a great example. That's a great way to align with the insanity and say, wow, that really doesn't make a lot of sense at all. As a matter of fact, it doesn't make any sense. Something that doesn't exist doesn't have to die.
Yeah.
It doesn't
And I
have
feel
a life
bad
to
when I
live.
don't wait even like 5 minutes before I start worrying about something. It's like, okay, see you guys later.
But why
Okay,
wouldn't you feel bad? It's a bad thing, you're thinking. But think of the persistence it seems to have, rather than start to see it's the insistence you have that it persists. Your insistence about it,
Yeah.
your make-believe is so believable to you as reality that you can keep doing that.
Exactly.
Now, I know you have moments of peace because occasionally you have moments of silence.
I'm eating.
And I know that some of those moments are just
I was
gaps
eating.
trying
I
to
was
figure
eating.
out. Yeah, I get it. But I know that some of those quiet times are just you planning your next launch. But I do that too, Anthony. I'm not exempt from that. I often am wanting to instigate or to interject something in something
why we get along.
that doesn't sound right. So I'm not condemning, I'm simply mentioning that if a thought has no basis, it is condemned by nature.
Right. Because instantly I'm a problem
contempt.
solver. I'm like, well, maybe we'll just buy another pair of cutting shears and keep them somewhere else that's on one side of the property.
So it's not because nature holds things in contempt. It's because if something doesn't have any basis in reality, it has no basis in functional purpose. It's not going to work. It's not going to be a usable, valuable, useful product here on Earth amongst humans.
Yeah.
So
or just a simple
feeling bad is feeling a thought that has no basis and thinking it's real. That feeling is an accurate assessment of your admission. If you start seeing that, you'll start seeing that all these things you're talking about are actually cries for help in a language that seems foreign because you're attaching it to a story that seems to have nothing to do with the principle, but it's actually revealing the awareness you have of what's wrong in your attempt to even get it across.
Right.
Just like the feelings are the effects, the stories become these narratives that are actually cries for help.
Yeah.
They're asking for somebody to say, hey, stop. I don't need to hear the story. I don't need to know all the twists and turns to know that you're struggling with something right now.
Yeah. Because everybody is struggling with something.
You know, I imagine everybody's doing what they're doing. And I imagine amongst that doing are things I can't even imagine. So I'm going to let that be enough rather than try to actually sit here now and make a determination that I then have to wonder if it's in fact true and accurate and spend time. I don't want to even spend the time on it. What's the point? The point is, it's just another distraction and another endless thing.
No, because the point is you could have empathy for other people, that there's nobody, you always think, oh, my problems are bigger than everybody else's. But, everybody's got their own problems. We talk about this.
Well, that's a transition of being able to see that what we're seeing people struggle with is actually valuable information, just like what we're struggling with is valuable information. It's like a GPS coordinate telling us that we've made the wrong turn and to correct your path. Or what does it say? It says, return to the route, something like that.
Yeah.
So we're getting
Proceed to the route.
We're getting that information. To see this as something we're doing is to see it as something that's we can feel compassion and considerate toward others doing it, because we don't see it as who they are. We just see it as something they're doing that they don't understand yet how to do.
Or on that Instagram where the girl says, you know what, you're always going to have, so to think that one day everything's going to be better and you're going to have no problems, you're always going to have some relationship problem, you're always going to have some eating problem, there's always some problem you're going to deal with. And to have this imaginary vision that everything's going to be perfect one day, it just doesn't happen.
Well, everything's perfect right now, Anthony. If there's an absolute source, everything is perfect right now. It is what we were doing with that perfection that we're struggling with.
Good point.
It's what we're doing wrong, thinking it's right, that we're struggling with.
Exactly.
It isn't.
That's the truth.
Doesn't exist. Perfection.
And that's the truth.
Perfection is our natural state. So talking in terms of that girl saying those things, she's talking about human dysfunction and then saying it's never going to be perfect. Well, the dysfunction of dysfunction is perfect.
Yeah.
It's dysfunctional.
Love it, Jack. See, that's why I like this. You don't leave it on a bad note. And then when I finally at the end, I'll call you instead of worrying. I go, listen, I got to figure it out how I'm going to always feel better, right? And like that's not the goal either, to always feel better. That's where I go. I need to always feel better.
Well, because you're not admitting what you're doing that's worth. So that you have no your mechanism for dealing with this is trying to stabilize unstable thinking, instability.
But doesn't everybody probably does that, or a lot of people
Doesn't
do that.
matter. But what's the difference? Why don't you just start where you are and forget about it for just a second? You might have clarity with what everybody's doing in a way that can actually help them, rather than say, well, you're doing it. I feel better now doing something worse because you're doing it and everybody else
Yeah.
too. So I might as well just be as idiotic.
Taking my ball and going home.
But Anthony, it's a learning curve.
Yeah.
And we take that curve too fast to think we can escape it, and we crash. Allowing it simply to be a lesson and allow it to give us the information that it has is actually starting to see how beautifully designed we really are, and how quickly we have made believe that because it's uncomfortable, it's something we need to try to escape, rather than value the discomfort that we're creating, because the thoughts we're having have no place, no purpose. And we know the longer we entertain them, the more of that experience we're going to have that's disturbing and dysfunctional and disabling and all that stuff, discomforting.
Yeah.
It's very simple.
Yeah, that's the funny part.
Hysterical when you
Yeah, it is funny. It's both comedy and tragedy at the same time.
When we take it seriously enough to think of it as truth, it is not funny. And that's why most people don't think jokes on them are funny.
Yeah.
Well, everyone else is laughing. But in this case, if we're actually seeing it as it is, the relief is funny, because we've been taking something seriously that's been a joke. And that becomes very obvious, because it starts to, you can actually cry with cries of awe to begin to actually witness the freedom we have and how immediate it is, and see that it's always been available. We just haven't been utilizing it. We haven't been functioning on that accurate basis. We haven't been doing the things that would be commensurate with that alignment. We've been doing the things we thought would finally get us to the place we always thought we needed to be, with the things we needed more or less of, and never seem to even get them. Even when we get them, we seem to think they're not quite what we thought they'd be, just like you started today.
Or the truth is too, you have so many things that you love, it's impossible to remember them all. So it's a matter of, you just can't remember them all. I mean, that's a lot of things. It's kind of sad. You can't remember all of them. You have to leave some of them behind.
Well, I would say if they have any existence, you know them all. If you're trying to make believe that make believe is all you remember, then you're trying to make believe that something that doesn't exist should be remembered. I don't see the connection.
Yeah. So it's like, it would be like standing in front of the ocean trying to just sweep all your problems away. So what you're trying to say?
Well, I generally am not trying to say anything, though I do struggle at times. But if you're listening, you'll see that collection of thoughts you're having are just memories of things that aren't happening. And to think that somehow they should be happening is to miss that everything that's happening right now is all that's ever happening right now, Anthony. So there is no memory that's lost. It's all present. It's absolutely here. The fact that you can make things up and make believe that they're actually happening, and then think that you need to remember all those things, is just another hopeless path to make believe that someday when you remember all those things that you think should be happening, then everything you think will be happening, is to miss that everything is happening right now. It is happening.
Yeah.
Everything, including all of your thoughts. Right
Is
now.
it possible to have two thoughts at the same time?
I imagine it's possible to do a lot of things that we think is impossible, and it's impossible to do the things that are actually impossible. So my suspicion is we have a lot of thoughts going on at the same time. We are not paying attention to all the thoughts we have going on, but our body is operating on a basis of seemingly knowing what to do without our thinking. So we have a sense of knowing within our own experience that we don't even think we know, to be allowing it to do what we're doing without thinking about it at all.
And I guess the two alternatives, either be unhappy about something I want to fix, or happy about something that I've done. I mean, that's the two modes. I don't really see a in between gear. It's either this has got to be changed, or this is great, I love this.
Yeah, everything that isn't happening is all that needs to happen. in that
Yeah.
model.
It's a lot of work. Somebody said, I hate this, I love that, I don't like this.
It's a lot of work because it can never happen. So it's
Yeah.
constant effort.
Sounds like a lot of work.
There is no
Anthony.
effort in what is possible and what is happening. There's no effort. It's just happening. So in those two directions, Anthony, think of what the big book says, that we largely fear not getting what we want and losing
Or losing something we have.
Okay, so now think of that in relation to what we're discussing in this discussion.
Yeah.
If we have everything there is, and you can't want any more than all there is, then to think our thoughts are real and true and think we need to get somewhere else is to think we're losing everything we have and not getting everything we want at the same time. It's all coming, those two fears are coming out of the idea that we're not where we are with all there is. And if we're here, and it's all the only place we ever are, the sadness and the regret and the condemnation are all coming out of thinking we're not here.
Yeah.
And that everything that there is isn't here either. And that what we need to do is go get it where it isn't, because we don't think it's here. It has us try to pursue what doesn't exist in the name of denying what does exist where we are.
And that's the big picture.
Well, that would sort of narrow down those fears. And the book says that self-reliance is the source of fear, because the kind of fear that we create is based on the thinking we do about the self we think we are. As soon as I think my thoughts are real, I think who I am is only what I think. If those are faulty thoughts, then my whole world becomes corrupt and everything I think about that follows. That's why all these stories are nothing more than the same story, trying to justify continuing to maintain them, because someday they'll get better enough to be revived from the hospital and walked out of the hospital healthy. They don't have any existence except for the thought that they have an existence because we made them up and we believe in them and we hope someday and trust someday and have faith someday they'll come true, which they won't.
So when my friend kept saying, you know what the truth is, Anthony, I could have said it's ever changing. Is the truth ever changing or is it constant?
No, it can't change.
The truth can't change?
The truth cannot change.
I think sometimes it does.
I know you do. We listen to the many versions of that thought come out of your mouth for years now. If absolute is absolute, it's absolute, period. It's the big
well, gravity changes depending on where you're at.
What's that?
Gravity changes depending on where you're at.
So what does that have to do with truth?
Okay, well, that gravity is like a truth, a principle, and that changes.
These are all projections. The universe is a projection of truth. It's a form. It's not the substance. It's based. So
I could have said the universe is a form of truth. And he goes, you know what the truth is? I could have said, well, the universe is a form of the truth.
Gravity is a law.
Yeah.
A theory.
And the fact is, Anthony, I don't think gravity changes.
A law. It is a law. It's not a theory.
I don't think gravity changes. What changes is the relationship of it to the amount of matter that's near it or far from it.
Yeah.
So there's probably some stability, like light speed. Light speed doesn't change.
Yeah.
It's always going at full speed. It doesn't start and build up to light speed. It's always light speed. So I suspect, and Gabe would be better to clarify this, but that gravity doesn't change. What changes is the matter in relation to it. What changes in our thinking is the matter we make and the thoughts we have that we think change reality and truth. They don't change reality and truth. They change our thinking about reality and truth. They change our thinking about each other. They change our thinking about the stability of our thinking. They change the suffering we do. They do not change reality and truth. If what is relative is finite, as it's described as being a process, this experience we're having, then what would make relative but something infinite? How would there be any distinction between
the relative infinite theory?
So my sense is the relative is infinite. We're just seeing it from bodies that are designed to see things in a time-space environment because it's practical for bodies to do that. For our function.
What does that mean? The relative is infinite. The relative is infinite.
The substance of the relative must also be infinite. It's just a projection of something. Like a movie seems real, but it's actually just a projection of a film. It's light.
Yeah.
flickering through film. That's
Yeah.
the basic concept of illusions is just that. And what we think is real here, look at what happens to bodies. They disintegrate. What do they return to? The elements of their nature, the essence of the physical nature, which are the elements are the smallest thing something can break back down to. So hydrogen is hydrogen, can't be broken down any further. It can be heated and mixed with other things to create other things, but it doesn't mean that it's the essence then. It's now a culmination of something else.
Yeah.
Its essence
He's
is
an old
hydrogen.
soul. He's an old soul.
Carbon is always carbon. Whatever the elements are elementary, essential essence.
So what's your theory on the soul then? Where does that come from, and what is that?
I mean, it's the idea of our spiritual nature being independent. Maybe it is. I don't know. It seems to me that the essence of essence is essential for everyone, and it's probably the exact same thing. Does it not mean we don't have the capacity because we inhabit a body that's separate to make believe that the soul is separate because the body is separate? Yeah, we can think that. My sense is it isn't. I suspect that we're part of a great knowing that's the great knowing. It's not divided into a bunch of spirits that are running around. We think of it as, because we're attached to our bodies as our reality, we think of our body then as having a spirit that's distinct from reality. It may be.
And I just realized 3-4 years into knowing you, I don't know what the V stands for.
Victory.
That's what I was thinking, right? That's what I was hoping. Is that wrong?
Yeah, Vaughn.
Okay, that's right. Vaughn. People are in 100 years when I'm telling people the story, they're like, "You knew Jack Hoffman?" Yeah, he would tell us the answers to that.
In that knowing sense, we all know each other. There is no division. There is no indivisible means it isn't visible to our form because it isn't a form. It's a substance that's absolute. And right now, the physicists are starting to realizing that the nature of the universe that seems to be space where we think nothing is actually more matter than all the other matter in the universe that we think of as matter.
So I know we haven't personally met yet, but we are very connected as one and all individuals.
Yes. You're talking about everyone now. All right.
Yeah, that's a good way to end it. I like that. Now I'm going to try not to think about anything I need to fix within the first.
So here would be a goal too in our conversation is to start thinking on the basis, not in all the decrepit things we do to try to figure out how to fix them, because we know if we keep doing them, they're broken. That's all. We don't need to know.
What if everything's going to be okay?
We thought we were going to fix each one of them at one point because we thought they all had life that we needed to correct. They don't have any life. They're all coming from the same corrupt thought. If that thought is corrupt, our conversation could include the things we were capable of doing that we don't even think we're doing.
Yeah.
But express the desire we have and the wanting we have to be a participant in doing something beyond what we think is even possible.
Yeah. That's the way. That's going to be my motto. And then he would wipe his glasses and he would just go on to doing some normal thing.
Well, so you have a new slogan.
Thanks, Jack. Thanks,
everybody. See you today, and Lensis and Jana. Anthony, thank you for coming. JP with me for a minute. Gabe, I know, is not feeling well, and some of the.
So to wrap it up, Jack, you never wrap it up nicely and put it away. What's the moral here?
Moral.
I don't say you never do, but let's wrap it up and call.
Morals and virtues and ethics certainly don't depend on immorality, non-virtuous and unethical ideas.
It's just a byproduct.
But they're all naturally the byproduct of value that can be created, substance. And substance would mean that if we're missing the substance and only looking at the form, we're only going to operate in relation to something that's transitional and changeable, and thinking that constantly changing or thinking about it as a goal when it drives us crazy. Why? Because it's crazy to make something that's changing is all that there is.
So now I can just laugh. When I start going off into something I need to fix, I'll just laugh at it.
Well, you'll see that you'll do it without having to plan on doing it and thinking you do it naturally, because you'll just start seeing. It's like crying when you're moved. Tears don't come because we say, now it's time to cry. It's just an expression of movement, either through emotions or awe. It's both ends of the spectrum.
I could breathe. I feel my breath. I feel more relaxed after this.
Well, that's a very powerful statement, Anthony.
Yeah. Because I'm not worried about what I'm going to worry about. Actually, that's what started to happen with my mental obsession. I was worrying about what I was going to worry about.
Well, the fact that you can talk about it tells me
I never realized that.
The fact that you can talk about it tells me that your awareness of what you're doing is growing because you're starting to observe what you're doing rather than just doing it as though there's nothing else you can be doing.
And then when everything was perfect, it was the worst feeling because there was nothing to worry about. I was just re-worrying about things that didn't. It was terrible.
All right. So is that the wrap up?
Yeah. Good job. And a big breath after where you just go.
So for all listeners out there, we'll see you around campus. The earth is our campus. Wherever we walk is our campus. We have a chance to communicate with others in the most honest way we know to, and beginning to notice what we're actually doing in the simplest way we're doing it. We're thinking about things. We're having thoughts about things. That doesn't make our thoughts real. It doesn't make our thoughts true. It doesn't make our thoughts a demand or a requirement for anyone else to agree with or have faith in or trust. It's just a thought we have. We can share those thoughts. We can communicate with people. We can be honest. And in the process, honesty will be natural because it's natural. And the dishonesty that's so unnatural will no longer take the kind of effort it took to think we were going to someday turn it into a truth that would justify the dishonesty that we've been maintaining for as long as
Turn it into a truth. I love it.
Yeah.
That's
crazy. Truth already exists. We don't have to get it there. We're there. It's here.
Yeah. I don't have to answer his question on what the truth is for the truth to be there still. It's not relying on me to define it.
Just begin to notice, Anthony, for you and your experience, how much conversation you have going on in your head with a self that's imagined. Just begin to think of that. You're playing tennis in a thought pattern.
And I still got that wrong. Jana and I both got that question wrong is the scary part. Today,
Just think
3 years.
Think about that. It's good for all of us to think about the conversation in our head. We think we're talking to ourselves. That means there's two of us, at least in our brain. That would be defined as schizophrenia in psychology. It's probably not the healthiest thing we can do. If I am thinking about myself, why don't I just begin to know I am, I exist, I am.
How long could you go without thinking about yourself, realistically?
I don't try to time it, Anthony. I just.
What would you guess? Like, would it be over an hour?
Yes. I don't even entertain the questions that go down those rabbit holes of trying to look for an answer that's impossible to ever concoct.
Well, I'm just thinking, I think about myself.
I know you are.
Yeah, most
You're
of the
asking
time.
me a question and I'm telling you I'm not interested.
Okay, enough about me then.
Path.
Enough about me then. What do you think about me?
Not much. You are as you are. I don't need to think about you for you to be as you are. I don't need to come to terms with all the things you do and think that somehow that gives me better knowledge of you, because I know that much of what you do has no basis in anything other than what you're thinking. I'm going to leave that to you. I'm going to make my business the business I make in the discussion I have. And it's not trying to entertain those thoughts as mine. I'm going to let you.
Yeah,
you can think about yourself all you want. You'll mean no more or less to me. Love you guys.
Love you. Thanks, you guys. Bye. Bye, Lindsay. Bye,
I love
Jackie.
you, Jack.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Jack.
Bye.